you for coming today. So I'm Jerica, I'm pretty sure everybody knows that. Thank you to Paige, Becca, and Donna for being on my committee and helping me with this project. So this is kind of what I've been working on because I'm in the 4+1 program. It's what I've been working on since my undergrad. So this is stress levels measured through salivary cortisol in United States nationally ranked fencers. Oh, and if you guys have any questions, you guys can ask me questions at the end. Okay. So I'll ask you guys this little icebreaker. A Gallup poll in 2005 asked these questions. How many of you guys have felt stressed out yesterday? All right, majority, that's like 80%. So globally, 33% answer that as yes, they felt stressed out yesterday. In the United States, it's slightly higher at 43%. And if you guys could choose to be stressed out tomorrow, would you choose to be stressed out tomorrow? Raise your hand. Nobody, okay. So hopefully after this presentation kind of can flip your relationship with how you think about stress and how you go through your daily life, I guess, with different obstacles. And nobody has to answer this question, but the Gallup poll also asked, do you think your life is meaningful? And they found that for people who do find their life meaningful, that the best predictor is stress. So a stressed out person found their life to be more meaningful. And they also found that the amount of adversity that they have faced makes them have a more meaningful life, like they feel it's more meaningful. So a more meaningful life means more worrying, which means more stress. And they also found that people who are pursuing their goals or are facing a lot of challenges, they feel like they have a more meaningful life. And as we all know, in pursuing challenges in our daily lives, that is pretty stressful. And Kelly McGonigal, she has a book. She has a couple books. She's done some TED Talks, and she's a psychologist that talks a lot about stress and came up with a stress paradox. She says stress is destructive until the moment we believe it is. So kind of had that in mind throughout my whole project. Some interesting literature I found is that stress is a mindset. So if you believe stress to be enhancing and it's a challenge state of mind, then it enhances your cognitive, affective, and neuroendocrine responses when confronting stress. If you find it to be debilitating or you're in a threat state of mind, then you find that the resources are outweighed by the demands of the stress. And what originally drew me to this project, when I was in undergrad, I was researching stress and performance, and I found that there was an inverted U shape. It was a theoretical curve that showed that there was optimal stress, but on each end of optimal stress, there was eustress and distress. So to a certain point, stress was useful or could be used as a tool. And as I did further research, it went back even further to a 1908 study by Jerica and Johnson that they proposed this similar relationship with an inverted U with stress and performance. There is an appraisal theory from a research study in 1984, and it says the cognitive, emotional, and physiological effects of stress are determined not by stress itself, but by one's perception of the stress as a threat in which the demands of the situation exceed one's resources to cope, or as a challenge in which resources exceed the demands. Why did I choose fencing? So, with like anything in research, you're probably going to be spending a lot of time on it. So you want to make sure that it's something interesting or something that you have an understanding of. So I have a background of fencing, and my family fences, so kind of makes sense that if I'm going to be trained as a scientist in college, then I can help, then I can supplement that with my knowledge of fencing and athletics, and hopefully I can come out with an awesome project that I can share with the world and have knowledge from both sides. Furthermore, fencing in the US and worldwide is growing. So fencing is one of the original Olympic sports in the 1896 Athens Games. And in the past year, the membership for US fencing of competitive athletes has grown 20%. Fencing is not only physical, but it's mental, and so a lot of people refer to fencing as the physical chess. So that's pretty interesting. And the tip of the fencing blade So you have to react within 1/16 of a second. And I don't know about you guys, but that seems pretty stressful to me to have to react so quickly. Furthermore, the current athletes of the 2017-2018 national teams, they are breaking records and breaking barriers and setting new records. So for the first time in U.S. women's epee history, we were able to get a gold medal at a World Cup. So these athletes are pretty phenomenal. We also have the first Latina fencer to represent the United States at World Championships and Pan American Games. Furthermore, Ibti Haj Mohammed, she's the first athlete to represent the United States at the Olympics wearing a hijab. And she has a Barbie modeled after her, so that's pretty cool. And she's an amazing fencer and an Olympic athlete. She wasn't part of my study because she fences saber, and I focused on the discipline of epee. Furthermore, as to why I chose fencing is I found that my interests and my goals really aligned with the goal for the Department of Sports Medicine, even though my research was completely separate and independent from U.S. fencing. But Jeremy Summers, he actually gave me approval through U.S. fencing to do this research. He states that our sports medicine program's ultimate goal is to help change the culture of fencing through education by providing our athletes, coaches, and parents with the tools of optimal performance. So that's what I'm looking at, optimal performance for these athletes. The gap in literature that I found was that there were no studies of stress levels and how they affect fencers during tournaments. What I did find was one study with fencers, but it tested their cortisol levels, and it was serum cortisol, so it was blood instead of saliva like I did, and it was during a practice. So one study in 2007 says stress response associated with practice is generally lower than during a tournament, and furthermore, it was also said that true competition induces greater hormonal response compared with laboratory exercise. For my project, the primary purpose of this study was to compare how cortisol levels fluctuate during a tournament, and B, analyze cortisol levels to see if there is an optimal range for performance. And it was hypothesized that A, cortisol levels would peak after a loss or stressful bout, and B, there would be an optimal range of cortisol for peak performance. From my research, from what I have found and read, corticosteroids, so a little background on cortisol, it's a hormone, and corticosteroid hormones are secreted by the adrenal cortex to protect the brain against adverse events, and they are essential for cognitive performance, which is part of fencing. Recent studies have shown that positive effects of glucocorticoids can have on vigilance and cognition. So there was a study that did hormone replacement therapy, and they took out the glucocorticoids from the participants, and they found that there was memory impairment. And when they replaced that hormone, they found that there was also memory impairment. So the conclusion of their study was that there is an optimal range of glucocorticoids to have in your system in order to have positive effects on vigilance and cognition. And from that study, they came up with this graph. And so it shows type 1 and type 2 receptors, and that they can't be overly saturated. They have to be at like just the right amount saturated in order to have this the positive effects for cognition and vigilance. And types of stress. I found that there are many types of stress, and everybody may define stress differently. So because it is so broad, I chose the parameter for my research was going to be stress, and the definitions going with according to the American Psychological Association, the APA. So there are 3 types: acute, episodic acute, and chronic. And what I found the fencers, or what I identified the fencers to probably be experiencing is episodic acute stress, feelings of being in a constant rush or pressure for performance. And for the 3rd type, chronic stress, that is where we see that too much stress is actually harmful, but we don't see that with these athletes during competition. It's episodic acute stress. Different stressors are environmental condition, external stimulus,